The mission was very clear. Like, we were there to destroy the terrorist training camps, kill the bad guys, and try and capture this guy, Osama bin Laden. It was very clear. And the snipers, we get a bunch of mental management training. But when you leave the Navy, you really leave behind this whole support network. It's there 1 minute, second, it's just gone.
Someone who may have lost someone, how do you find purpose in your life when you do lose someone?
I can only speak from my own experience, but for me, every time I've dealt with loss of friend or family, my place I go to is, okay, like, what would they want me to do with my life? Not wasted on drugs and alcohol and feeling sorry for myself. It's almost like I owe it to them to live the best life I can.
What's up, y'all? It's David. Welcome to Dead Talks. Today's episode, I have Brandon Webb, who is an ex-Navy SEAL, pilot, sniper, and many more things, including author of many different books. He talks about mental management, and that's why I wanted to talk to him about a specific mindset. Obviously, being a Navy SEAL, going to combat like he did, he deployed in Afghanistan, amongst many other things, takes a specific mindset. I was curious to see if there's a crossover between the Navy SEAL mindset and how we could apply that to everyday life and getting through all the things that, like I said, life throws at us. Obviously, he's lost people in war. He's lost friends. He's lost team members. I was curious to see how he deals with that, how ex-veterans deal with that when they get back home from war. And also one thing he mentioned that was really interesting, a point that we're going to get into at some point in the episode, is that being a Navy SEAL, you have all that support. When you're there, when you're in war, you have the brothers around you, you have a support system. And then when you get home, that entire support system is gone. And how do you manage that? How do you deal with the mental struggle that comes with life when you get back home? And again, I believe this all applies to how we can all live our life and how we can mental manage the way we think, the way we talk, and how we could all live a better life. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Brandon was a really cool guy. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Apple, Spotify, please write a review, yada, yada, yada. Let's get into the episode. Thank you.
But Brandon, again, I want to thank you for making this happen from all the way across the world in Portugal. And it's always an honor to speak to someone that has had a background like you and that has served the country. And I've prefaced this before pre-recording, your ability to talk about mentality. Obviously, it takes a specific mentality to be a SEAL. And I am curious about how that mentality translates to general struggles in life. Like I'm not saying people have to go through Hell Week and be a Navy SEAL in order to get through things, but I feel like it's applicable to things. And obviously, we're talking about death, and I talk about death and loss, but I feel like there's a translation into specific things that you spoke about for people to get through that. And before we get into that, feel free to introduce yourself for anyone that may or may not know you, and we'll get the ball rolling from there.
Sure. So my brief background, I was born in Canada on the West Coast, up in the mountains. My mom is American, my dad's Canadian. We moved, my parents had a dream to sail around the world. So my parents moved us to the States when I was, I think, around 9, 10. We moved on a 50-foot sailboat with my folks and my sister. Did some traveling to Mexico on the boat. Like, I spent a year homeschooled on the sailboat all through Mexico. Then we lived on the boat for 5 years, and I actually grew up I got my second job working on a scuba diving boat out of Ventura Harbor, and it was just an amazing experience. I was 13 years old. We had a incredible captain crew, and we would take divers out to the islands, and the captain certified me to dive my first summer when I was 13. So I worked that boat 13 to 18. Then my parents wanted to do a big trip to New Zealand, and I was about to turn 16 at the time, and I really didn't want to go because I was making really good money on this scuba diving boat, and I just had a good life. I was making like real money as a 16-year-old, and just had a good life. And I want to do what other 16-year-olds do: chase girls with their friends and and get my driver's license and not go on this crazy trip. But I ended up going with my family. We sailed from California to Baja, Mexico, over to mainland, down to Acapulco, then went 30 days at sea over to the Marquesas Islands, which are the first island chain in the French Polynesia. And that was when my father and I really started to argue, like two captains on the ship. And I made it to Tahiti, and we had a big blow up, and he kicked me off the boat. He was like, look, I think you didn't want to be here to begin with. Maybe we should talk about, different paths. So I left
That's one way to do it.
Yeah, funny. The other day, I just saw I have a photo. I can send it to you if you want to put it in the show notes. But I have a photo of me on a catamaran. It was a photo I think my mom took of me sailing away. So I sailed from Papeete, Tahiti to Hawaii, and then flew back to California and worked on the scuba boat. The owner, Bill, let me live and work on the boat and finish high school. So, all that kind of plays into like how I became a Navy SEAL. I was always wanted to be a pilot as a kid. I just obsessed, and I watched that Star Blazers cartoon. It was an anime cartoon in the 80s. I was like obsessed with flying jets. But I realized when I was about to turn 18, I didn't have the grades. My academics were kind of up and down, and I didn't have the grades to go to the Naval Academy, and even really didn't. I just, because I was on my own too. I didn't understand like how to prep for college and submit an application. And I was just like, okay. And someone that knew me, one of the passengers on the scuba boat, said, you should go check out the Navy SEALs. And I read a book called Rogue Warrior by Dick Marcinko. He was the guy that's founded SEAL Team 6. And then I was like, okay, I can do this. I saw an easy path to that as far as like application process. So that was what kind of nudged me into the SEAL teams. So I joined the Navy in '93, became a search and rescue swimmer, helicopters, then applied for SEAL training. First package got denied. It's a whole nother story. Just had a really bad boss. And the second package got approved. So I was classed up with SEAL Class 215, graduated out of 220-ish. I think we graduated 23 originals. Then went to SEAL Team 3, and it was just an interesting time in history because up to that point, the SEAL Team 3 and SEAL Team 4 were operating, 3 in the desert, actually doing real missions, and 4 in South America. But the rest of the teams weren't really like active. There wasn't that really a lot of conflict. So it was like a boys club. You just had like huge budget, travel the world, and it was kind of a good deal. And then things started to heat up. I deployed with SEAL Team 3 Gulf Platoon in 99 into 2000, and we were doing shipboardings, enforcing the UN sanctions against Saddam Hussein, and then the USS Cole got bombed in Yemen, and that was in 2000. And so we were sent down to the Cole as a kind of quick kind of reaction force to set a perimeter with the special boat team, and I was on the bridge with as a sniper team with a bunch of law rockets and 50 cal sniper rifle. And I remember thinking like, wow, like the nature of warfare has really changed. 2 guys in a rowboat with explosives basically almost sank $1 billion warship. And it just kind of hit me that, wow, this is like the nature of war is kind of changing. And then came home from that, and 9/11 happened, right? And I was set to deploy with SEAL Team 3 Echo. We were the next platoon that was going to deploy. And then, at the time I was married, had an 8.5-month pregnant wife, and went to Afghanistan. And then, and we can dive into any of this stuff later. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit long on the intro, but then I came back from that deployment and, got into sniper training. I was an advanced sniper trainer. Then I got recruited to our basic program, and then I got promoted twice and ended up becoming course manager for the sniper program at a time when, history of, it was like an interesting time in the SEAL history because guys like Chris Kyle came to the sniper program, the American Sniper. Marcus Luttrell was one of my students who wrote the book Lone Survivor, and then, that was made, both books were made into movies, American Sniper and Lone Survivor. But that was kind of my generation. And also I remember talking with Chris before he died, like we were both 29-year-old chiefs in the Navy. And we talked a lot about death, because I know it's very different losing a family member, but when you're in your mid 20s and you lose like 4 or 5 close friends, suddenly that's a hard space to fill, right? You can't just like go find 4 or 5 new friends quickly. Um, and Yeah, that was something I think I ended up getting out of the Navy in 2006, and um, that was people say, "Oh, do you have any issues with combat and PTSD?" I think my core issue is that just dealing with this loss, right? Like I got out, and my best friend I lost in Benghazi, Libya, Glenn Doherty, and that was tough. And it kind of all came crashing down on me because I I really kind of put off the funerals to the other friends because I was like, okay, I have my own family, and these guys wouldn't want me to kind of, you know, be sobbing once a month. I mean, there was a time there I could have went to a funeral a month for a whole year. So we had that big helicopter crash in Afghanistan. I just didn't want to deal with it, and I was like, at least at the time, I rationalized it. I have my own family to think about, and I'm gonna live my life and not feel sorry because I'm pretty sure
Mhm.
most people wouldn't want us to um, they want us to live our life, and we have the life to live, and they wouldn't want us to feel sorry and go down a really dark path. So anyway, that's my super extended introduction, but I think that's for me. Um, the challenge and transition, and I like to talk about this because I see it a lot in a lot of professions, including the SEALs. Like you have this you go through this incredibly hard training. In the snipers, we get a bunch of mental management training, which is something I'm really interested in, and it's a passion of mine. And but when you leave the Navy or you leave the Olympic team or a professional sports team, you really leave behind this whole support network. It's there 1 minute, and in a second, it's just gone.
Mhm.
And I think that's where people are at risk because I know we have an issue in the SEALs, right? Honestly, with guys don't transition very well. I thought about it for many years, and I think it's comes down to this support system is gone. Like the coaches, the doctors, the psychologists, the teammates, it's gone in an instant. And if you have a moment or something and nobody's there to kind of catch you when you fall, that's when you're at risk.
Mhm.
And a lot of guys go down a real dark path. So I think that's important to talk about and realize when you're making like a major career change. You have to understand you need to build these networks all over again, these support networks, because you can't do it by yourself, as you know.
That's an interesting point. So I was always correlating it to, like, okay, you talk about the mental management, and I think it's a different tier of mental management when you're going through combat, and obviously what you've experienced and trained for. I always thought perhaps you guys weren't trained to deal with that type of stuff after the fact, as opposed to me looking at it from what you just said, where you're just losing a support system and not having that support system. So is there a difference between the mental management of being a SEAL and going through combat and dealing with emotional stuff, like dealing with the loss of your team member or your friend, or are those two separate issues, those two separate topics? Does that make sense?
I think we have a very warrior like culture in the teams, and we would joke like, and there's I mean, I know we lost a guy in training, and the guy's like within 30 minutes his locker was cut. Like we have these big lockers with all our gear, his locker's cut, and part of it's like his teammates are going in to clean up anything, making sure that the Navy officer doesn't
Yeah.
deliver the package to his wife's house with a bunch of pornography magazines, things like that. But the joke was, if you die, we're going to split your gear, and oftentimes that the supply officer would come to kind of collect the expensive equipment. It would be gone because the guys would like cut the lock and
You
just
made an
clean out
agreement. You
all
made
this
an
stuff.
agreement. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a very like warrior like culture, and you have this support system in the team, But when you leave that and you're like reflecting on maybe losing teammates, friends, and thinking about combat, and you kind of don't have that kind of people to talk to, right? Like I don't mind talking about my deployments and these things, but I'd say it's really annoying when I'm at a party and I meet someone for the first time, and the first question they ask me is, how many people did you kill? I just think it's like super inappropriate. It's like, how many people did you sleep with last year? It's like, we gotta get to fucking know each other first, before we start going on these deep questions. But anyway, it's the mental management stuff I really took on to as when I was a sniper course manager, is basically the head instructor for the sniper program. One of our consultants was an Olympic gold medalist, Lanny Basham, and he really developed this mental management program that he used himself to win the gold medal. And I saw his principles because I applied them to my students, and I saw how powerful they were. Just like visualization, self-talk. We all deal with negative self-talk all the time, and it's just developing like a strong personal regime around being mentally vigilant, and then also realizing that part of it is having the support structure, which I talk about. It's like you need to rebuild this network of support. And for me, I was fortunate enough to join an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization when I was living in New York. And then I joined Young Presidents Organization. Then I went to business school and I have that alumni. And it's like really, really amazing people. And it's kind of replaced a big hole in my life. But another story I share, what I realized, well, my grandfather passed away. He lived to be 90, and he's like a character. He's like this big kind of patriarchal guy in Canada. It's like he has a huge family. My dad has 3 sisters, and I have tons of cousins in Canada. So my grandfather was like this big figure in everyone's lives. And when he passed away, I flew to Toronto, and I was at the funeral. My father was supposed to give the eulogy, and he couldn't. Like he couldn't. He was just so because like myself and my own father, we had a complicated relationship for many years, and we've gotten to a really good place now. But it was complicated, and it was complicated with his father. And guess what? His father threw him out of the house when he was, I think, 17 for not cutting his hair. Yeah. And so, but what I realized in this moment was, I was like, wow, my own dad, I have more experience dealing with grief and trauma than my own father. And I was able to be there for him and give the eulogy for my grandfather, because my dad he was too choked up. He was too emotional. He really couldn't do it. His emotions were just too strong. And that it was actually nice to be there for him in that way. But it really hit me. I was like, wow, I have a lot of experience dealing with this stuff. And, I think the toughest for me was back to what I said. I kind of stuffed away all this loss until I lost my best friend, Glenn. And it just kind of came crashing over me like a tidal wave. Because Glenn, I couldn't avoid. It was a very public, also extremely public thing. He was, everyone, well, a lot of people know about that Benghazi incident. They wrote the book 13 Hours, became a movie. And it was right at the time where I think Obama was running for his second term, and it was super politicized because Hillary Clinton was the in charge of the Department of State, and there was all these issues. And I was on the news. The family asked me to help, kind of blocking and tackling the press, because the press was at his house 5 a.m, knocking on the door like the day after he died, just harassing at the time it was his best friend, one of his other best friends, Sean, who was living with him. It was crazy how aggressive the press were. And it just reminds me that Don Henley song. What's that? It's like Dirty Laundry. It's a great song about, the news anchor, she'll tell you about the plane crash with a gleam in her eye, right? It's like such a good lyric.
I wish I had that on deck to cue it on right now. I'm not going to move that right now.
Such a great song.
Yeah.
And that was written in like the late 70s, so still applicable to modern news media. But yeah, anyway, that's my my whole story on loss. And then I would like at some point, I think purpose has a big part of how we overcome loss as well, and kind of rationalize.
I want to get into that's 100%. I have that in my mental notes to talk about purpose, because I feel like, and I want to get to that, because I want to ask you a couple of things before that. But to tap into purpose really quickly, I always feel like people, even me at some point, we almost put the purpose on a pedestal, and it creates this like pressure to find purpose. You know what I mean? And I think people think sometimes purpose has to be this grandiose thing, whether it's like, writing a book or doing a podcast or this or that. And sometimes I think we can the purpose doesn't have to be that grand in order to continue on. But I want to put a pin on the purpose, as they say, or no one's ever said. But you've clearly experienced quite a different amount of variations of loss in many ways. Like your last friend you mentioned was very public, and that's a whole different experience. You've lost people in combat, and then your grandfather in your personal life. So you're juggling different types of grief. And I think all grief is different in many ways, of course, but those different experiences, I think, do show up in different ways. So when you said everything came out with your friend, Glenn, right?
Yeah.
That was that an indication that maybe as a SEAL, or maybe you personally, you're keeping things in? Because I always wonder if there's a fine line between being someone in your position, that you're a warrior and you have to kind of you have to bury your emotions. I'm assuming when you're in combat, you can't let your emotions get in the way and dictate the way you're going to operate in the field. So and that might line up with the fact that you have no support system after, no way to get it out. But is there a similarity in the fact that SEALs have to control their emotions, but by controlling your emotions, are you really just burying it deep inside and putting it in a place that's going to come out later?
Yeah, I think you have to compartmentalize things, especially in combat. But there comes a time where there's a reckoning, right? Like you gotta reconcile with this stuff, and it's why a lot of vets don't like talking about their combat experience with civilians, because I feel like they think that they just can't relate to another a civilian in the same way they can relate to a veteran that's kind of been there and experienced similar things. And I think that's fair. It's one of the reasons, like I have a media company, and one of our websites, softrep.com, we have a podcast, had it for 11 years. And I think one of the reasons the podcast does well is because usually it was hosted by myself for years. Now we have another veteran hosting it, but we're able to like ask the right questions and get these guys to open up, guys and gals, the way that they just wouldn't to a regular radio host. Because we just kind of been there. We share that kind of shared experience. But as far as, I agree with you on the purpose. I don't think you have to have this, like, I'm going to go colonize Mars like Elon Musk. I think that's great. I'm a fan of Elon Musk, but I think just being like, I want to live a good life and be happy and be a good person, that could be a purpose. But it's, when people ask me why I don't have a lot of issues around my Afghanistan deployment, because it was a time when, like it was raw. I mean, you lost your father, right, in the Twin Towers. It was personal for a lot of us. But when I went to that deployment, also the mission was very clear. Like, we were there to destroy the terrorist training camps and destroy and kill the bad guys and try and capture this guy, Osama bin Laden. And it was very clear. And we did 99% of that, except the UBL, within the first 18 months. It was done, like mission accomplished. And I could, like, and you're over there, you're seeing, I still have a photo in my house of the Al-Qaeda recruiting poster that shows like a Photoshop mock-up of these planes crashing into the Twin Towers. And it was like, when people say, oh, all these conspiracy guys. I'm like, Jesus, how could you think that's some conspiracy? I've worked with the government. Trust me, they're not that capable. um, but it was like very real, and it felt like that deployment for me had a lot of purpose behind it, and I understood the mission. I understood why I was there, and we dropped bombs. I was a reconnaissance sniper and dropped bombs on a lot of people. Sometimes they bring their families in the hills, and I was just like, okay, that's their decision. I'm going to get back to see my family. But when I think about it, my deployment experience is very different than someone that was deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, and that was around the point where Afghanistan, I would say, turned into my generation's Vietnam. There was just really no good reason for us to be over there. It wasn't going well. It was just a sinkhole of money and wasted life. And I think that's where a lot of veterans that served, I would even say post 2006, 4, 5, 6, were like, what the hell are we doing over here? I remember I had friends when I left the military that were telling me they would go out on a night mission, come back like reloading their magazines with bullets, and some NCIS guy is like interrogating them on this raid that just happened, like trying to find fault so they could like prosecute. And that's like,
Jeez.
How can you fight a war like that? It was just like madness, and people are losing their lives. And that's why a lot of my friends in the SEALs are like, okay, we don't know why we're over here, and that's not a good place to be. It's a sign of bad leadership, and also when you don't have a purpose behind a combat deployment, that's how you end up with a lot of mental trauma. That's why you have these. I think I compare the generations that came back from Vietnam versus World War II. World War II is just as gnarly as Vietnam, like probably gnarly, like more loss of life, more just trauma, loss of limbs. And the World War II veterans that transition were I think, very different than the Vietnam vets. Because also the World War II, the world was just thankful when that war ended. Mm-hmm. And they had a hero's kind of homecoming. And there was a very clear line between, I think, good and evil, right? Like Hitler, what he was doing was just not clearly not a good thing, and it needed to be stopped. And I think those veterans from World War II transitioned much better because they were able to kind of rationalize it. Like, hey, we did all this crazy stuff, but, we won the war and the world's a better place. Or Vietnam, they did all these terrible things. There's really no purpose behind it. Then they come home, they're getting spit on by their own country. And that's like terrible. And that's why I think there's so much trauma behind the Vietnam vets when they came back. And now I think we're seeing it with a lot of veterans that were in Iraq and Afghanistan post 2006, who are really having a hard time rationalizing it. Because I can rationalize my experience, and I think that helps. That's one of the reasons why I really don't have any issues about anything I did over there, which is interesting because I feel like that's I've talked to my friends about it, and they were like, they're really struggling with like losing friends in 2010, getting investigated by NCIS, fighting a war that has no clear definition. That causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm so happy to be talking to you about this because, again, it kind of goes back to talking to someone who's a civilian like me, and I try to put myself in positions to understand certain things, but I would never know this without speaking to someone that's been there. So I can't even say, excuse me, that I understand it, but that is just a perspective of how much that purpose and the reasoning for doing something helps with the aftermath. And I think that is a good transition for kind of what we're talking about by finding purpose. And let's talk about civilian life per se. I feel like there is some kind of correlation there, obviously much different. But as you were alluding to, finding purpose through loss, and I'm not comparing the two between going to combat, that's like much different, but I'm saying there is a carryover with the idea of how important purpose is.
Oh, for sure. I think we have to find it over and over in our lives. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're combat veteran or not. Like it's something I talk with my own kids about. You know, I
Yeah, how do
really,
you do that? How do you find that? What's your opinion on finding that perfect someone who? Let's just keep. I mean, we can overlay the purpose to across all paths. It doesn't have to be around with grief and loss. But let's say someone who may have lost someone. How do you find purpose in your life when you do lose someone? In your opinion, like for example, if you lose your father, brother, sister, mother, and they were their whole life, and they're struggling to even carry on because they don't feel like they can get out of bed and they don't have a purpose. Like, how do you find purpose in that case, because it doesn't come with like rationalizing someone's death because they weren't serving the country? You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but for me, every time I've dealt with the loss of friend or family, I just really my place I go to is okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry, but at the end of the day, you know, would this person, like, what would they want me to do with my life? Not wasted on drugs and alcohol and feeling sorry for myself. And it's almost like I owe it to them to live the best life I can. And that's kind of just the simple rule I've had all along. With my kids, you know, part of why I wrote that book, The Red Circle Behind Me, was because, you know, my son was born when I was in Afghanistan. I came home to a 5.5-month-old baby, and I missed the birth. And their mom and I, we ended up divorcing. We thankfully had a good relationship post divorce, and still get along great. And part of it was I wanted to write my story so my son and his brother and sister later in life could read about the struggle and the challenges that their mom and I went through. And I remember my son Hunter read the book when he was 12 or 13, and he called me crying and was like, "Dad, I had no idea." You know, and then I was like, "That's why I wrote the book." It was like,
Hell yeah.
and you know, I had a conversation with all of them when they were kind of getting into like the early teens. I said, "Look, you know, your mom and I have been through a lot, and you know, fortunately, I was doing well in business, and uh, you know, had a couple books do well, and they were living a good life. You know, we had not flying around in private jets, but we had a good life. We were going on, you know, ski trips every winter and vacationing. And I said, look, you guys are in a position where, you know, your mom and I have been through hell basically. And, you know, the only thing that you owe us is just to like reach for your dreams. You know, it's like figure out what you're into, what your interests are, and we'll be there to support you 100%. But I feel like that's the only thing you owe us is like reach as high as you can, and if you fall on your ass, we'll be there for you, you know. But to not do that is like it would be a shame, you know, to not to live your best life. And you know, so far so good. My son actually graduated college and moved to Lisbon this year. He has a software company.
Oh,
Yeah,
hell
he's a
yeah.
businessman.
Talking about living the highest potential. Jeez. All right. Yeah, that's it right there.
Yeah, he's a 22-year-old startup CEO. Already has a profitable software business he built from scratch.
So
yeah,
he's
really
finding a little bit of purpose pretty early.
yeah, no, he is. He's lucky. His sister as well. She's 20 and in London studying industrial design, which she's like always been an artist and designer. And but the younger brother is great. He's got one more year in high school, or has one more year in high school, and he's kind of figuring it out. But you know, I applied the same kind of coaching I gave to my sniper students with my kids, like teaching them how to deal with a lot of and adults there's so many well-meaning adults like coaches and teachers, but then the ones that can do real damage, right? I remember even my high school counselor was telling me like, you're never going to amount to anything. Like, what fucking counselor says that to somebody, you know? It's kind
of those are real. I hear those stories. I'm like, what counselors are people going to that are saying this?
Yeah, this guy, man, it turns out he ended up being a politician later. This guy was like the
Oh,
worst.
perfect.
Thankfully, I had enough good mentors and people around me that I just used it as fuel on the
Mhm.
fire of motivation. But my point is, like, I was a I was a youth sports coach for a while. I coached Little League, and I would hear these coaches say things to kids like, "Oh, don't strike out, whatever you do." I'm like, dude, that poor kid, and that's all he's thinking about now is striking out. Like,
Mhm.
you just like imprinted this negative feedback loop in his head. But things like that, and so teaching my kids how to deal with negative feedback and well-meaning, but oftentimes um, it's very negative. And that's why when we were training snipers, I told my instructors, okay, we can't, if you see someone making a mistake, especially beginners, don't point out the mistake, because you're just, oftentimes they don't even realize it. And if you're telling a guy he's flinching on the trigger pull, which means he's anticipating the trigger and kind of has a nasty flinch because it'll throw the round off. If I say to someone, hey, stop flinching, it's the same thing as telling a kid not to strike out. You're just like programming him for failure. And then the guy next to him hears it, and everyone else in the earshot hears it, and that's all they're thinking about. So
Mhm.
if you see something that needs to be corrected, just give the corrective instruction or procedure. I would just say, hey, slow down, go over your shooting checklist, take a nice
Mhm.
deep breath, smooth trigger pull, like that kind of thing, just to
Right.
reinforce the positive, not the negative. Um, but all this stuff, we used to have a 30% failure rate in the sniper program. And when we changed from a negative teaching style to a positive teaching style and did a lot of this mental management work, we started graduating everybody. We had a 99%
No shit.
graduation rate. Yeah. If anything, it got harder. But yeah, I saw it in front of my own eyes. And I was like, okay, this stuff works.
So
And
let me
so,
clarify. So with the mental management, this is how I'm understanding it. And tell me if I'm just an asshole. But I'm taking it as with the mental management to really focus on the words and the way we speak to ourselves and the way we even express certain words to each other. And
yeah,
those words will just
100%.
will continue to add up. They will just continue to add up.
That is a big part of it. Like the program we ran primarily dealt with what you're just talking about, self-talk, how you talk to others, how we talk amongst ourselves, which I can get into a little bit. It was also about visualization, like visualizing perfection, but also visualizing if something goes wrong. Like, there's a story when I think Michael Phelps was in the last time he was in the Olympics in Beijing, and he jumped into one of the final matches and his goggles flooded, and but he had rehearsed this mentally, and he ended up setting a new world record with flooded goggles, right? And that's why when you when you train so hard and visualize for contingencies, that's the difference between the gold medal and the silver medal. It's what makes a true champion is that mindset. It's like, I don't care if my fucking Speedo comes off, I'm going to beat you naked in the pool, right? Like, it's just, that's the attitude. And then you see people like in sports, oh, my favorite, it was what happened. I read this in the Olympics in Paris. One of the ping pong players had his favorite paddle stepped on by an audience member, and he was favored to win gold, and he totally crumbled because his like favorite paddle got crushed. And that's the difference. Like, you should just be like, dude, I'm gonna pick up that shitty paddle over there and
Mhm.
beat your ass with it no matter what.
Yeah.
That's the difference in mentality. So that makes a big difference. So the visualization stuff, the self-talk, the also um, visualizing for like perfection. Students would always ask us, what's a good score on the shooting test? Because we had these incredibly hard shooting tests out to 1,000 meters. And I told the instructors, like, tell them perfect. Like, that's what we expect. Because we just say, oh, if you're shooting a 90, that's pretty damn good. So when we started saying, well, shoot 100, then we started having 100% scores for the first time. And so it's just reframing that conversation in your head is so important. Um, yeah, I mean, I just can't
That makes
say
sense.
enough about the mental management stuff. But the self talk, you hear it show up commonly as, I'm not good with numbers, I'm a klutz, I'm always late. Like, if you think of yourself this way and you're like vocalizing it to yourself and other people, how are you ever going to be anything different? You're just like totally like living this self-fulfilled prophecy, right?
Yep.
And I hear that all the time. So, and even sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, but I have this autocorrect feature because I've I've trained with this stuff for so long, and it's something we it's not like I'm perfect and I'm gonna, I have no issues. Like, life happens. Like, shit comes up all the time, and I'm like, oh man, I got to deal with this. Like, I'm having an issue here. Like, I had maybe a really bad day doing something, and like, the other thing too is I play chess a lot. My oldest son Hunter really got me into chess, and it's one of those things. If you're having a bad chess day or a bad day doing something, you just gotta stop. Because if you don't stop and you just go down that rabbit hole, it's just making it worse. And that was one of the things Lanny taught us. He's like, look, if I was having a bad day, I would just stop and wait. And he's like, when you have the good days, that's when you want to, push the throttle forward, because you want to like reinforce that positivity and that
Right.
kind of flow state that a lot of athletes call it, the flow state. You want to reinforce that as opposed to the opposite of that, because you'll do damage if you're just having an off day, which everybody has. But if you just reinforce it to the max, you're going to do damage. So anyway,
Yeah.
there's a really good book called With Winning in Mind. It should be turned into a parenting book. So it's great for like self-development, but for parents, that's a great book to use on your own kids.
I'm going to need you to remind me that at the end so I can checkpoint that, because that sounds interesting. But I love what you said in regards to the autocorrect, because I feel like I've been focused on this for a while, but I feel like as of this year specifically, I've really been hyper focused on the things I say to myself and even speak out loud, like just in general, the communication in general, because I do believe in everything you're saying, and I feel like I'm living that. But also what you said, it's not perfect. Excuse me, but that auto correction hit me the most, because I do catch myself saying something, but then it's now my response time to flip it, to fear and flip it, if you will, is much faster. I think that again comes back with repetition and reinforcing the right words, and then all of a sudden, if you do it enough, it'll catch up. And I think for people that are in a dark hole or going through grief or just not in a good place, if you just do start that mental management you're saying and start paying attention, just as a minimal exercise, as even not even a corrective exercise, just start listening to what words are coming out, what are instinctively coming out, what am I saying to myself, and then from that point, I feel like it's, oh, I'm saying this and that, and then you start making those corrections. And I love the point that you said, like, we're not perfect, life happens, but I think with this training that you're discussing, it just preps you, like in the Michael Phelps aspect. It's like, when it happens, you're a little quicker to respond. You're a little quicker to autocorrect. You're a little quicker to recover. And that's where the work comes in. It's not going to prevent shit from happening in life. Like, that's going to happen, but it prepares you. And then and you also, I have a quote that I wrote down. You said something that I wanted to tap into, which I think I even maybe subconsciously brought up my last episode. You said something like, the best feeling of coming through the fire, knowing the path wasn't easy. And I feel like that resonated too, because like when you just come through, when you get through struggle, and that's like a force that I feel like you don't want to like anticipate struggle, but when you are in struggle, that feeling after getting through something it doesn't have to be grief. It could be just going through whatever you're going through, but that feeling of coming out of the fire is such like a, whew, and I feel like that could be part of the visualization.
Yeah, we need it. Like, nobody gets out of life unscathed. I don't care how much money you have. We all deal with shit. Like, I have friends who are extremely wealthy, and everyone has problems. So, and you realize, I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. He's long past, but he gives some great talks you can still go listen to on YouTube. And big part of what he talks about is like, look, if your life was just everything you wanted, the way you wanted, it'd be super boring. We need the struggle. We just need the struggle because it makes the wins just that much more gratifying. Um, and you think about it, even as a kid, right? If you get all these gifts from your parents or family, but it's like that one time when you saved up for something you really wanted and you got it finally. Like you feel so good about that. Much different than this, gift you get on Christmas. And it was the same when I was an adult. I remember we had so much free badass gear in the SEAL teams, knives, flashlights, backpacks, camping stuff, water filters. But it was like I didn't value it because it was just kind of given to me.
Mm.
But if I bought something on my own, like I remember I saved for my first. I was obsessed. One of the captains of the boat I worked on, Mike, had a Rolex Submariner. So I was like, man, one of these days I'm going to get a Rolex. And I saved up. I had a enlistment bonus when I was at SEAL Team 3. And I finally had enough money. And I bought this Rolex in Bahrain for $2,900. And man, I fucking love that watch. And it was like, because I earned it. It was years to get to this thing, and finally saved up enough. And it just, these kind of things mean much more because it's the struggle. Without the struggle, it's just not as satisfying. And I think once you learn that, it's a very powerful thing to realize, because then you realize, okay. And I always, the other thing is, the one great thing about the SEALs is we always look for advantage and adversity. So anytime something happens in business or life, I'm always trying to like, okay, how can I turn this into like a positive, like a net positive for me? Like this crisis. And Churchill I love Churchill has so many good quotes, but he was like, never let a good crisis go to waste. And it's so true. Like there's always some great things that could come out of the crisis where everyone else is feeling sorry for themselves and bitching and moaning. If you're the one going, oh, this is good. Like I'm gonna really use this to my advantage. And if you have this mindset always, it makes these kind of things almost exciting.
Dude, it's mindset. It's literally everything is fucking mindset. It's crazy. And I feel like I've always had a hard time feeling sorry for myself. And I wonder if it's, I don't know. I feel like people expect life just to go through life. If you're not coasting, then you're doing something wrong. And I feel like that is like, I'm not saying that's what people think. That's just my random thought that I have right now. But I feel like when I see some people respond to life happening to them, I'm like, what did you expect? Like, yeah, like you should expect success for yourself and be confident in yourself and have these goals. But it's like in my head, I'm like, plans don't exist. We have like a blueprint, but things are gonna change. Like, this is what it is. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the hell this life shit is. But it's like things shift, things change, shit happens. It's gonna be bad, but you can make it good. And in adversity, look for that opportunity. But it's like I don't have any expectation that life's just gonna be smooth. I envision the good, and I want to live a good life amongst that. But it's like this expectation when things happen, especially like death. Yeah, it's gonna hurt like hell, and I'm not saying that's gonna be unavoidable, but I'm not shocked by it. As weird as that sounds, I don't know if I'm like insensitive to it or at this point. I'm definitely not insensitive because I still feel it very heavily. But it's like this life that we are in, shit happens, and
Yeah.
you don't have to focus on it like through this mental management. But it's like I don't know. This is what we're in. Like I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, humans are incredibly emotional and oftentimes more irrational than rational. So, that's a part of it. We have to constantly, and it's something that affects everybody. So, and the emotions are tough to deal with sometimes. But if you can kind of like do those autocorrects, it helps for sure.
Yeah, no. Now that every time I have something happen, I just don't know why I'm resonating with that so much. Now I'm literally envisioning like my iPhone when you type in the wrong word, it just automatically changes it. Like I feel like that is how my brain is officially operating now visually because of you. So I want to thank you for that. But brother, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I don't know if there's anything else that you feel like you didn't get off your chest or anything you want to say at the drop. I feel like I like to give you a little bit of moment if you want to plug that book over your left shoulder or say any last words or anything you want to do. The mic is yours, as they say.
Yeah, no, look, the red circle is my detailed version of that introduction I gave, a very long introduction, but it's just kind of my journey, my struggle. So I would definitely encourage people, if they're interested, to read that. And then I wrote a book called Mastering Fear. It's probably one of my favorite books because it's helped a lot of people. Like I still get DMs all over the world. The book's published in Chinese, Russian, French, all sorts of different languages. And I get really interesting feedback, especially when the Ukraine war happened. I had a lot of Russians and Ukrainians reaching out, just saying how the book helped them. So I have a lot of this mental management stuff we talked about in Mastering Fear. So that's a great book for people that kind of want a toolkit to kind of, or blueprint to go off of. I was inspired to write that book because one of my close friends, Kamal Ravikant, who's an extremely successful tech venture capitalist, his brother, a lot of people know his brother Naval on Twitter. But Naval started AngelList and a bunch of other companies. But Kamal was a close friend of mine. We were in New York City, and he confided in me that his parents had never taught him how to swim. He came over to America from India. And he's like, he was good friends with Tim Ferriss. I think he told me a story when he was out in Long Island, and he was at this party with Tim and these other people, and they had a pool, and he was just so embarrassed that he couldn't even enjoy it. Like, they made him imagine going to a pool party and in the Hamptons, and you're getting stressed out, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, is people going to invite me to swim and I don't know how to swim? It's like, I just couldn't imagine that because it's such a fun thing, right? And and Kamal was asking me for advice, and I was like, dude, just give me 1 week. I think I can get you to swim. And he was really nervous. He's like, okay, but maybe I should take a lesson. And I think he thought I was just going to tie him up and toss him into the deep end. Right?
This Navy SEAL is going to teach me to swim.
Yeah. So I took him in. I was a member of the New York Athletic Club, and I took him to the Athletic Club, which was one of the nicer pools in Manhattan. And I said, okay, what do you like least about swimming? He's like, I don't like my head in the water. I feel like I can't breathe. And I was like, okay. And I put together a whole curriculum for him for the week. So the first hour, I got him in the pool. And this is a guy that, I don't know if we've all seen the people that really deathly afraid of water, and they just panic and they want to grab the edge of the pool or something. And that was Kamal. And I said, okay, put your face in the water, out of the water, in the water, out of the water. I was like, just do it till I tell you to stop. And it was 10 minutes goes by. He's like, okay, dude, this is boring. I get it now. And I was like, see, you can breathe. And I taught him how to hold his breath, come up, take a breath, blow it out. And then I was like, okay, now your lungs are like a float system. Let your breath out and watch you'll start to slowly sink to the bottom of the pool. And I was like, just when you sink to the bottom, just push off and then grab the side and you'll get a breath of air. And so I was like, okay, do that for 30 minutes. And then so the week went by, and then I taught him to replace grabbing the pool edge with rolling on his back. I taught him to float on his back and just breathe and calm himself down. So these basic things. But by Friday, he could swim the length of the pool. And sometimes he'd get water in his mouth, and I watch him. Before he'd grab the side or the lane lines, and he would float on his back, calm himself down, a couple seconds, flip over, and start swimming again. And then he's like, the favorite thing was he started enjoying doing cannonballs. That was the first thing he would do, a big cannonball in the pool. And he was like, man, I never knew swimming could be so much fun. He's like, you need to write a book about this. So I wrote an email to we were taking the N or R train back to Midtown, and he told me you got to write a book about this. So I went home and I wrote an email to my agent, and then we sold the book that week. So that was how Mastering Fear came about. So that was how Mastering Fear came about, and it's just about, sometimes you got to take these little baby steps to overcome fear. If it's, people have fears. They fear of public speaking, flying, getting out of a relationship, career change, all this stuff. But I talk about that a lot in Mastering Fear. So I hope people hope people pick that book up and read it.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like the baby steps, and then you said a week later he's swimming into the pool, so it takes a little bit of time. And sometimes I think it's also beneficial. Sometimes I wonder how much to just jump into certain things. Obviously, a pool maybe not so much because you're going to drown, but in certain situations, it's okay. I think just to jump into the fear. So stepping into the fear is pretty powerful. If everyone listening, I'm going to plug the links to everything he's just mentioned with his books into the show notes. But brother, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I'm happy you made this happen. And I might have to bother you in Lisbon one of these months, days, years. I make it over there. I'll give you a ring. And also the Alan Watts, when I go to the gym, I used to listen to, System of a Down, Linkin Park, and like get all mental when I go to the gym. Now at this point in my life, I'm literally listening to like Alan Watts Spotify play. There's weird ethereal music, and he's just speaking over it. We were on bench press. I'm like, I can't believe this is working. But Alan Watts is the truth.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. And yeah, I really the audience doesn't know this, but I put David through hell getting on the show. I had a bunch of cancellations, so I apologize for that. And it was really nice to chat with you.
Yeah, for if nothing, when I say nothing to apologize, like I know you don't know me, but it's like it's all. I don't know what other podcasts you know. I know some people are assholes in this world, but it's all good. I'm just happy for you to take the time. So it's really nice to meet you, dude. And I'll keep you posted when I'll give Mark everything just so you have it, and I'll gather it. I'll give you guys the heads up. I might actually I have some episodes. The episode's done now, I think, but I have some episodes that are scheduled for a little later. So I may, excuse me, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I may plan to get yours out possibly Monday. I'm just going to talk to my team and see if they can get everything edited in time, and then I'll shoot everything your guys' way in an email. And if you need anything, just whatever. You got a friend in LA. I'm sure you have plenty, but you got another one.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.